Good afternoon. I'm here today to have a talk to you about chatbots. I'm going to tell you about some of my experience of building chatbots and give you a bit of advice on who you might need and what you might need them to be doing. So my name is David Curran. I work in OpenJaw Technologies. OpenJaw Technologies is sort of a medium-sized company, about 450 people, based in Ireland and with a big office in China as well. So one of the things here is the sort of AI technologies I'm talking about now are not just for the big Apples and the Googles of this world, the sort of medium-sized companies, and also not just for the startups. The sort of average-sized companies are also, putting big investments into this area. So at the moment, I am building a Chinese language chatbot system for TravelSky, which is the company in China that helps you get your tickets and organizes things like this. I used to work for IBM Watson, where I worked for companies such as Mercedes, Credit Mutual, Royal Bank of Scotland, Orange Bank, building chatbots for them. And I work in many different languages, not all of which do I speak. So at the moment, OpenJaw work in the travel industry. So I'm going to describe why chatbots might be interesting to the travel industry, but this is going to apply to telecoms and any other industry as well. One of the advantages that I'm not talking to a travel crowd is that I can tell you, the facts and what really happens, rather than just sort of trying to sugarcoat everything, just to try and make, So, what are we talking about? Why chatbots are of interest to people now, what they can do, what the promise of them is, a few definitions just so we know what we're talking about, what they can't do, which I think is really important, because if people have sort of an inflated expectation of what's possible, that's not going to result in a good experience. And a bit of a checklist, a 5 steps you need and who you need and what you need and when you need them to be able to actually deliver a chatbot project. Okay, so why chatbots? People used to ring in to a call center when they had a problem. You'd sit there waiting on the line, and eventually someone would talk to, and usually quite good, and they'd get your problem fixed. But nowadays, no one really wants to hang around waiting on a phone call. They'd much rather just type and text and get their answers back that way. Everyone, I think, realizes at this point just the vast reach of these social networking platforms. The interesting one there is WeChat, which I'll talk a bit about later, but everyone knows WhatsApp and everything and how they get used every day. So something that's kind of interesting is travel is a slightly delayed industry as compared to telecom and things like this. So the idea of everyone wanting to be on messaging is fairly new in travel. They take a few years behind telecom and things, which is quite interesting for telecom people, because what you're doing now, other industries might be doing in 2 or 3 years' time. So what does the chatbot look like? What I'm talking about here is those windows at the corner of your web page or on WhatsApp or on one of these messages where you type in answers. All the techniques I'm talking about here will work for voice chatbots, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about where a system you type into and you can get answers back from an automated system, not from a real life person. First thing that happens whenever you start talking about AI and machine learning is some people seem to think it's magic. They're just going to buy this product and it's going to sit in the corner and it's going to work instantly and never have to be trained and no work has to go into it. And that's not how it works. It's not magic. The work here is building up a data set that describes your problem and helps the computer find the answers. And we constantly have to keep improving the data. Either new examples we haven't seen before, or sometimes the world changes and just, we have to deal with those new situations. When 5G comes along, the sort of questions that be asked might be different. These sorts of things happen as the world changes. Okay, so why would people or companies be interested in chatbots? So first of all, that's where people want to talk to a company. They don't want to be waiting on a phone line. Even email might seem a bit slow. It's just they want to type off a quick message, get an answer back as soon as they can. So that's a really important point in that there's no point building a chatbot just to say you have one or just to save money, or it has to actually make a customer's experience better. So because you're not waiting around so much, because you're not dealing with menus and stuff, you want to be able to get people's problems resolved quickly. But important point here is don't build a chatbot and don't use a chatbot unless you can make someone's experience actually better. Secondly, there is issues with costs. Every time someone picks up a phone to answer in a call center, it costs some money. You know, you're paying them wages, you're paying for their light bill. It costs some money. So you'd rather use their skills in the best way possible. If it's a simple, easy to answer question that a computer can answer for them, let's not bother the call center staff. This is particularly true in some languages. Like I'm building a chatbot in Norwegian at the moment, and trying to hire someone who speaks Norwegian is just really expensive. So for certain kinds of languages, it really is an awful lot cheaper if you can get an automated solution to the problems. And of course, there is also the possibility of revenue. You'd like for someone to be able to upgrade, to buy extra services through a chatbot. What I would recommend is get a good FAQ chatbot, a chatbot that solves people's common questions and maybe walks them through a few common tasks that they want to do first, and then worry about revenue. Obviously, people want to make more money, but if you can get the chatbot and the people who are building the chatbot understanding the general concepts of how you build a chatbot, how you make one good, and then worry about revenue, it's probably a better order to do things in. Okay, so that was just a quick summary of what chatbots are. You type into them and they give you back answers in an automatic way, why you might want one, and now we're going to move on to the actual nitty-gritty of who you need and what you need to build one. Okay, so the first thing, and the sort of bedrock, the foundation of everything, is the tone, positioning, personality of the chatbot. This is the sort of stuff that a marketing department is their bread and butter. Programmers and us engineers, we don't tend to know this sort of stuff. But if you start talking with the idea of, what is your brand's personality, someone in the marketing department knows this stuff. They have it written down. They're willing to talk to you about it. They're excited by it. The way that Vodafone talk to you is different to the way Orange talk to you, or certainly one of these new sort of startup telecom companies. So if you think that in mind, every company has its own tone, its brand, and your chatbot has to reflect that brand back to the user, because every interaction the user has with the chatbot will be expressing that brand. Also, from a practical point of view, if you have an idea in your head of this is what the chatbot sounds like, this is how they talk, it becomes an awful lot easier to write answers. When you have a voice like that in your head, writing out, answering people's questions is actually a lot faster. So even though this seems a bit touchy-feely and not engineering-y, it's really does save you time overall. So tone, positioning, personality. There's a bit of a checklist here for the sort of questions you want to ask to work out this tone and personality question. So things like, who are our target end users? Obviously, the way you talk to slightly older users is different to how you talk to younger users. What do you want them to do? What tasks do you want them to fulfill? The chatbot that is going to take in complaints is going to have to react differently to a chatbot that is trying to guide people through an area. These sorts of things. A job description, it might sound simple, but it's a really important thing to write down before you start. If you know exactly what your chatbot's going to do, it saves you so much time later on. So before you go out building a chatbot, talk to either someone in marketing or someone who understands your company brand and try and answer these questions. Once you can do that, everything will be much faster. Okay. Very common problem I see when people are trying to build a chatbot is they say, oh, we won't have a personality. And that's, everyone knows someone who doesn't have a personality, and that kind of is a personality. It's just a terrible one. So you have this opportunity to express your company's brand. It will save you time overall. Do give it a personality. The tendency as you write answers and write, responses from the chatbot is to become overly formal over time. It's something to keep an eye on, but it's just a bit of a warning. When building a chatbot, decide in advance how you want the chatbot to sound and how you want to express your brand. Okay, now onto the slightly more technical parts. People will ask questions. Your data will have things people have asked you to do. You know, how do I put more money into my phone? How do I check my internet connection? These sorts of questions people have. If you think about it, you have about probably 10 topics in your business. So 10 things people worry about. In airlines, it's the flights, the seats, the tickets. They tend to be nouns, you know, fairly solid things you can put your hands on, the things that people are worried about. So a intent then is usually a topic, things people are worried about, and sort of a verb they do to that. So how do they book a seat? How do they cancel a ticket? So when you look through your questions, that tends to be what you're looking at. First of all, try and decide what's the topic of this question. And fairly quickly, you'll realize the sort of 10, 12 topics that your area has. And then what sort of verb are they using? Now, it won't always be exactly the same verb. There's many ways to say book a ticket. There's buy a ticket. There's loads of different ways, but it's the same concept. It's the same verb of getting a ticket in some way. Okay. So even though there's many ways to ask a question, you kind of want to map them to one idea. So what are they trying to do? And let's put all of those together. And that's what we call creating a ground truth. That's kind of the task in a chatbot. When you get examples of people's questions, you want to then map them to intentions. What is it that the person is trying to do here? You're generally talking about, let's say, 50 intentions in a chatbot, certainly starting off. So 10 topics with about 5 different things people want to do to each topic. That's back of the envelope, but that tends to be what you're talking about here. So this can be quite boring. It's in a spreadsheet. You have gathered questions from people, either from listening into call center logs or, you know, we'll talk in a bit about how you gather these questions, but you have these questions and you go through the spreadsheet and you mark off the topic, then the verb that they're using, and you say, right, now we have an intent. That task is relatively slow. You're talking a few minutes per question. You make mistakes. That happens. Sometimes you don't know until you do it what you should have done. So what I recommend is just going in there, labeling questions, labeling the intents, and then after doing it for an hour, you look back and go, oh, actually, maybe I, had some category wrong. That happens, but you won't learn unless you do it. So it's get your hands dirty and start trying. As a general rule, a chatbot is not going to be able to answer anything. It's going to be able to answer 50 of the most important questions in your domain. Those popular sorts of things people worry about, you should cover. And then I would ideally be able to hand over to someone else, either live to an agent or just, we got to a question I don't understand. I've sent an email to my human colleague and they're going to come back to you. But what you're trying to do is cover the big rocks here, and maybe the 20% gets slightly smaller over time, but it won't go to zero in the foreseeable future. You're always going to need people to check in for those weird questions that happen. Actually, it's the next slide. So, source of questions. First rule here is do not manufacture questions. It's so tempting to get a bunch of interns and say, think of 10 ways people would say their Wi-Fi router isn't working, or tell me 10 questions people would ask about their IoT device, and it just doesn't work. It's possible, it's better to take questions from internet search terms and Google terms, but people don't talk in internet forums and Google search the way they talk in real life. So it doesn't really work. So the other issue is if you say to one of your experts, write down the question someone is sending you in here. When they write down the question, it's not an exact translation. In their brain, experts translate it into expert talk, and then they don't even know they're doing it. Something kind of fascinating. But someone will say, I need to get a new phone because I broke my phone, and they'll put it in with acronyms and all sorts of expert talk, knowing what that means. So it's just something to warn about. Try and reduce it if you can. It's going to happen anyway. But when you're correcting questions, when you say to an expert, what was the last question someone asked you? They won't have it verbatim. They won't have what someone would type in, but they'll get pretty close. So basic warning there of, if your UI is a bit like WhatsApp, you need to kind of collect questions from real users through something that looks a bit like WhatsApp, because people will treat it in the same way. They'll ask questions in the same way. They'll end up doing And the main warning is don't try and manufacture questions. It just doesn't work. Okay. So who is needed? Let's check it over time. Who is needed? So marketing, people who understand the idea of tone, personality, who can help guide you to define your chatbot personality. Really important. It's the sort of foundation everything else is built on. Obviously, you need someone, a business lead, who's going to be able to see the value of building a chatbot. Unless someone can know that, oh, if we reduce calls by 50%, we earn this much money, and that's why it's worth investing this much money in. You're not going to have anyone to back your product and be able to, get the boss to agree that you should do it. Customer support, or someone who knows the answers. My examples here are from customer support, because that's generally what I've dealt with. But if you're building a chatbot for someone else, it's someone who knows the answer. So when a question comes in, how do I check the gas level in an IoT gas meter? That could be coming in from someone who's a relatively new working for your company. You need to be able to, you need an expert who knows the answer to that question to help you write the answer, to help you categorize the questions correctly, these sorts of things. An engineer, someone who understands accuracy tests and k-fold tests and finding problems in the data and these sorts of issues. Of course, I'm going to say you're going to need someone like me, but that's what you're going to say. But if you have at least someone advising you who's done this before, you really save yourself an awful lot of misery. Every time I talk to someone who's just built a chatbot and they see this talk or a sort of extended version of this talk, they go, that would have saved me a few weeks of work if I talked to you in advance. It's just how it is. Content writers, in general, the people who actually answer your customers' questions are really good at answering their questions. They're a very skilled group of people. Sometimes, though, some tweaks to how they write the answers, some tweaks to take into more account the brand personality and stuff can really improve the customer experience. So it's worth considering. There is now a job of writing for chatbots, and it's worth certainly getting someone to advise you and to look at your answers to help spruce them up a bit, particularly if it's going to be a very popular chatbot. So how much time are you talking about? Deciding personality, it's fairly quick. Marketers know this stuff. They can usually get that done fairly quickly. Gathering questions and could be really quick, but in practice it tends to take a long time. So one of the first things in a chatbot project is to get a relationship with the people who have the questions, to start talking about getting access to the questions, to clarify any GDPR questions they have, any worries they have about security. That's one of the things that really takes time, and that's where to concentrate early on to reduce the total time a chatbot is going to take to build. Classifying questions with a customer service expert, that idea of getting the topic and getting the verb that's being used, it can be quite quick, depending. You're probably talking about wanting 2,000 questions by the time you finish all your tests. You could start with about 500. Then as you gather, more tests and see people around the table and, look for different places for questions, it can build up from there. Writing answers, at this point, you're getting to the end of the project and it tends to, other things start, occurring as well to use up your time. But again, you're probably talking about 2 weeks. So in total, you're probably talking about 8 weeks to build a good, solid chatbot that covers 50 of your customers' questions. Then you run user tests with real users. You sit them in a room, you buy them a cup of coffee, and you see what if you had a problem with your telecom device. What was the last time you had a problem with the telecom device? What would you have asked? And then maybe give people some examples, like imagine your phone stopped working. What would you ask? Sort of start with general questions and give them specific kind of questions to tease out of them what they would do in this sort of situation. You have to be really careful you don't prime people too much, because if you do, they'll just give you back the exact phrases you give them, and that's not training anything. So that's a user experience testing. It's a skill all to itself. Okay, so I've talked a bit there about chatbots, who you need, about how long it takes, and some of the concepts. I suppose the main takeaway is this stuff is a lot of work. Get real questions and don't expect magic. You get real data, you classify it, and over time you get more and more accurate classification results, but it's not something that's magical. It's a lot of work done by skilled people, and that's just what it takes. Okay, so just some of my experience in China, in case anyone is going to work in China, maybe you can save you some of the mistakes I made. So first strange thing about China is just the vast scale. I talked about how you end up usually with about 2,000 questions when you go live with a chatbot in Europe. In China, the first day they hand over 10,000 conversations of, look, here's what people are asking us. So instead of trying to get enough examples to cover the 50 popular things people ask, what you have to try and figure out is find the 50 popular things people ask and try and ignore the other. Try the 20% of stuff that's rare, try not to cover it yet. And that's a different kind of argument you need to have with your clients. One of the clients I dealt with had 20 million unique users a month, and just the scale of their data is just vast. And an awful lot of startups here worry about what happens if we get 20 million users, and they build, Kubernetes systems and stuff that can handle this level of data, but it never happens. In China, it kind of does happen. So it is something you genuinely have to worry about. 6 months ago, not many people in Europe had heard of WeChat, and now I think most people know about it. It's just fascinating the level of integration it has with society over there. So, for example, you see beggars in Beijing who'll hold up a phone with a WeChat QR code on it, and that's how people give them the money. They don't use coins, they just give them money over WeChat. It's kind of like WhatsApp, but allowing payment and allowing all sorts of things, and with part of Twitter plugged into it, and it just kind of has everything. There are WeChat mini programs. They're very interesting. In order to develop them, you need to be working with a Chinese citizen. You need their unique number. All the documentation is in Chinese. There's 1 or 2 books in the West, but even they get outdated very quickly. So realistically, WeChat mini programs, you need to be working with a Chinese developer. One thing I would say is I've noticed, I think there's a gap in the market for tourists and WeChat mini programs, that things like restaurant translations and these sorts of things, that for quite a small effort, you could end up really helping the Chinese market if people are coming into your business and they want some sort of Chinese interaction. So I think it's just something that's worth considering. If you're in the tourism industry or dealing with a lot of people from China, it's worth thinking about, can we use WeChat here to help communicate with them better? There are technical issues in China. So one thing I talked about there was just the vast scale. There really is that many people. The Great Firewall is obviously an issue. It's not like you can just apply for a URL and use the next day. It takes a few weeks of filling out forms and stuff to get access to the system. The big players are often local. Here, the big players, Google and Apple and Amazon, tend to be really cheap. For instance, their chatbot services are essentially free. By the way, something that's worth mentioning, all the advice I gave you about building up these data sets, that applies to all of the chatbot services. So once you've built up that data set and you've labeled it and you understand the data well, whether you're going to IBM or going to Google or going to X in Amazon or whatever, it doesn't really matter. The hard part of the work is understanding the task and building up the data. It's not necessarily where the data is then used. So, for example, the Western services for this sort of question classification problem are effectively free. In China, they're really expensive. That's just how they are. GDPR isn't a massive concern. It still applies to you. If a European customer might be using your service in China, you still need to obey GDPR rules. They are worried about sensitive topics, even in places where they won't occur. So you do need some sort of keyword filtering and these sorts of things available, but they're technically quite easy. We've had to create our own version of Lilypad, our own sort of something that does something similar to Watson, and we've done that just because the big guys won't set up in China, and China doesn't want to send its data outside of China anymore. Which again, I can understand. Europe doesn't want to do it. America doesn't want to do it. It's an understandable concern. So, setting up in China, the local players tend to be quite expensive, and you don't want to send your data outside of China, which is understandable. Okay, that is what I have for you today. If you have any other questions, please send me an email. I'm happy to talk at anyone's